As soon as I get it lit, we're back again. This year I've been talking about dry fly fishing successively, and we've learned where it takes place on these rare waters. We learned how people learn to cast. We've seen how the job was done. Today I thought you might like to meet somebody who actually owns one of these fisheries, these rare number of fisheries on this limited number of rivers where the art is at its highest. Of course, in the old days, they were all owned by the great estates, up until quite recently. And that made the water management very easy, because one river I fished on was divided in the property of two great houses, and the two owners only had to have a glass of sherry together once every 3 months, and the whole river management policy was settled for the whole river. But then when the estates broke up and the rivers were sold in smaller pieces to lesser people, the management of the rivers in some cases fell down badly. And in any case, most of the rivers could no longer be fished by people just for themselves and for their friends, as they were in the days of grandeur. They became like shooting, the property of syndicates, groups of people who got together. It's rare to see somebody who has a private water. It's rarest of all to see a man as young as this who has a private water. And in fact, I think he's probably the youngest man I've ever met who got himself a piece of an English chalk stream by his own efforts. There may be some gilded young ones who still inherit them. Look at that. You can tell what time of year it is, can't you, even if he wasn't fly fishing, by the white owl. The white owl in daylight. He's a good fisherman, too. And he's been longing for years to come and fish here. Because this lad, and at my age I'm entitled to call him that, this lad was born in Dorset, not in the rich fly fishing circumstances, but as a country boy. And to tell the truth, when he was a little boy, he sometimes used to poach this river. And then he went around the world working and earning his money. And all the time he went, he thought about the Dorset rivers. He sat in hotels all over the world with pictures of the Dorset rivers in front of him and wondered if one day he might be able to have just a piece of his own. And now he's got it. He's still working just as hard, still succeeding just as well in his profession, but now, for some weeks of the year, he's got this of his own. And because I met him in quite unexpected circumstances, he invited me to fish here too. And he's fishing below this mill head, the mill house which he's doing up to live in. And I'm going to fish above it. And I'd better catch a fish today, because although I'm far too old to be competitive in fishing, although I never mind really whether I catch fish or not, as long as I have a good fishing day, the truth of the matter is that this chap is less than half my age, so it would be something of a disgrace, after all my fishing, if he caught fish today and I didn't. So I must get at least a couple of fish. In the meanwhile, he's got plenty to fish for. The river's in lovely order. All the sluice gates have been rebuilt. The banks, the weeds been cut just right. And he's surrounded by lovely things, including the white owl. Of course, the secret of this white owl is that she's got young, or he or she has got young, because normally we all know the owl hunts in darkness. But in the summer, it's light from 5 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, just when they have young, and there just isn't enough darkness for them to be able to hunt long enough to feed their... There's a nice one. Feed their young, and so you see a white owl in daylight, you can tell just about what time of the year it is, and you can tell that they've got young to feed. Well, that sets my mind at rest. To tell the truth, that was quite an easy fish. It was nicely placed. It wasn't as cunningly positioned as these things usually are in the currents and in the weed, but it puts me all right. Now we can do what we like to do when we've been a longish time at this game, and that's look for a more difficult one. It's a strong one, and it's a brown trout. They're all wild brown trout in this river. He never puts any rainbows in, which means he's doing it the best old way. They grow up in the river as wild fish. They learn to live on the wild flies, and they're a great contrast to the stockfish that get put in to the syndicate waters in order to provide fishing for all the members. So it's lucky for the river that he came this way. It's another thing you could date it by. The white owl's still feeding its young, but the lapwings apparently have had their broods and they're flying and they've flocked up again, you see. Their breeding season is obviously over. So you might set this perhaps at the end of July. And you'd be right. Now, there's a much more difficult fish here. He's right under the bank, over those two weed beds and round the corner of a bush. And we'll have to go about this very carefully. What I shall do is to try and set the length of the cast I want by throwing it out of his way towards the other side of the river until I get the length of the cast exactly right. And then I'll try and flip it round right under the bank. Sometimes, actually, you can flip it onto the vegetation in the bank and give it a little twitch, and it'll fall just in the outermost 2 inches of water. That is, if it... we've got him, and he's rushed straight out in the stream. Goodness, they're lively. You see, he's trying to go back, right back to the place he was when he was hooked. But I think we got him safely. Good, but I wonder how he's getting on. I'm sure he's got a few fish in his basket now, because the other thing is that for a man of his age, he fishes very well. Well, my honor is safely protected now by having 2 fish in my basket, so I can go and watch. The nice thing about having your own water and fishing it just with yourself and your friends, of course, is that you make your own wading regulations, which means you can walk in the water when it's necessary to approach a fish, which you can't do on a big syndicate because you'll send the silt downstream and spoil the fishing for the man below you. But he knows there's nobody below him. So he fishes as he thinks he will, and he fishes very well. Well, there's another nice one. And up here, right under where I'm standing, because I've been managing to stand nice and still, there's a very good fish working. It's not rising to the surface, but it is feeding, so I can tell him from where I am just where it is, and now he's got on it, and he's casting in the area where that fish is cruising. He's got it too. Well, that splendid music sounded as if a whale ought to come out of the water, but I thought I'd give you a hint as to who he was, so I thought we'd put a backing track on that particular fish that he caught, because he's a man who lives his life against backing tracks, because that young man is Greg Lake of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and that's a name that means a great deal in the music of the later generations. When I first met him, I was trying to photographs of water ranunculus over a bridge, and suddenly a Range Rover turned up, and out hopped this big young man in frilled leather shirt and beads, and said, "Good Lord, it's the old man." And I didn't know who he was, and I said to somebody nearby, "Who's that?" And they said, "That's Mr. Lake of Emerson, Lake and Palmer." I thought it must be a firm of accountants, and I thought he was very extraordinarily dressed for an accountant. But then, as I became a friend of his and I got to know his music, I realized that he is a great talent. And so the remarkable thing about that meeting was that the trout fishing not only brought me a friendship with a man less than half my age, but it also introduced me into the world of pop music. Only the very best pop, of course.